I'm Stephen Foskett, organizer of Tech Field Day, and we're here in Austin, Texas, with a group of international delegates brought in from around the world to learn about technology in their space. Today we have ZeroStack presenting, and if you'd like to learn more about this, you can go to techfieldday.com, and you can find a lot more videos like this at youtube.com/techfieldday.
Okay, my name is Ajay Gulati. I'm the co-founder and CEO at ZeroStack, and in this part of the presentation, we'll go through some live demos on how to actually get a self-driving cloud. So let's go back to our 7-layer cake, and we'll walk through each of these 7 layers, and I'll go through each of the layers and a demo on that layer. Okay, so let's start with the first thing, which is the automated cloud deployment and configuration, because that is the day zero work that somebody would do. Now, when you look at ZeroStack, the main thing I want to highlight is in the cloud operating system, it comes with all software built in. So all you have to do is rack and stack a couple of Z blocks, assign the IP address. They would start talking to the SaaS portal. Once you log into the SaaS portal, you would see those machines, and then you can just build your cloud. It takes about 15-20 minutes, and after that, you can start consuming the cloud. Okay, that's the day one process with any customer.
Can you use also IPv6 auto discovery or a similar feature?
So right now, the way we do it is once you rack and stack and you create an account on ZeroStack, you put that account on the host, and now the host starts showing up in your account. So we don't really need auto discovery, because you are putting a little bit of information on the machine to tell that the machine belongs to you. Okay. In terms of the building block itself, I just want to highlight we have an appliance which is a 2U appliance with 4 servers, and we have different flavors of the appliance in terms of CPU, memory, and storage configuration. So if you don't want to deal with any other server and installing the software yourself, you can pretty much use the appliance and rack and stack it. But if you already have existing investments in server, or if you have a preferred vendor, you can use servers from that vendor as well. And we have a minimum viable hardware spec that we typically send customer. It talks about what all CPU families we support, how much minimum RAM we need, storage, networking, and then that helps us qualify the servers as well.
Are these appliances OEM by a specific vendor?
So the appliance that we have, it is based off of the Supermicro chassis. But within that, we have picked what storage we want in terms of hard disk and SSD and memory and NICs. And there we have done performance analysis so that we can give you performance data sheet to say how much network bandwidth you can get for a VM, how many IOPS you can get for a virtual disk, read, write mix, all of those numbers we publish for the appliance.
Is Supermicro handling the parts dispatch and stuff, though, for repairs?
So we are working with AMAX, and AMAX is handling all of that. Okay, so let's go through the cloud creation demo. So essentially, what it starts with is that you would register a company. So for example, if you are registering a new company, let's say Tech Field Day Feb, and then now once you register the company, it essentially says that you have an account name, which is Tech Field Day Feb, and you have an account code, which is this short string, and then you can take this command and you can enter it on as many hosts as you want. So here I essentially have a ZeroStack cluster with 4 machines, and they basically just have ZeroStack operating system running, and nothing else is configured on that. And I'm just running the command there saying that I want to make these machines part of this cloud. Okay, so now I have basically associated the servers with that account, and then you can sign in to build the So now when you sign in, you would basically see these machines as part of your account. So there are all the 4 machines here. You select the machines, and you can see there is all the basic information populated in terms of number of cores, memory, overall SSD and hard drive. Next, you go through a little bit of networking and storage configuration. So you are providing different subnets for different kind of traffic here, and this is the only networking configuration you need to do. These are private subnets that we create within this cluster to basically carve out different kinds of traffic. What is the local IP? And as you can see here, I was mentioning earlier to the question saying that can you talk locally to the cluster as well if the cloud connection breaks. So what you are essentially providing is a local endpoint where you are saying that if there is anything you need to talk locally to the cluster, you can talk on this IP address. So that was pretty much all of the networking setup that you need to do. The next is essentially the storage setup where it shows you different pools of storage. For example, there is high IOPS pool, there is reliable high IOPS pool, there is high capacity pool, and there is reliable high capacity pool. And you can change the size of these pools. And as you add more servers to the cloud, you can change at that time as well. So essentially, it would let you figure out how much storage you want of what type. And if you want to enable object storage, you can do that as well from the same screen. So it will be part of the cloud itself.
Ajay, can we change the balance of those pools at normal runtime, or is that just fixed at install time?
So what you do on the install time, that gives you a certain pool configuration. When you add new servers, at that time you can say these drives should go to that.
If I've messed up at this point or my demands change, I can't change the balance of those pools.
So if you have
install.
If you have capacity, you can actually take a drive out of a pool, and you can do that later on at a drive level. So you can say
if I don't
that
commit everything at install time, then I can.
Then you can change. It's just that depending on how much data you have, it may take longer to basically take a drive and then move it from one pool to another because
particularly a large cheap drive.
Yeah.
What is the minimum cluster size? 3 nodes?
Minimum is 3 nodes. Yeah. Okay. So our typical block that we sell, the Z block, that has 4 servers, but you can actually start with 3 nodes.
A maximum number? You don't have a maximum?
Maximum, I would say we have something that we have tested internally. We can easily go to 150 to 160 servers. Oh. But if there is something bigger than that which is required, we can do that on a case-by-case basis. It's more of a function of how much we can test internally at this stage.
Do you support the Metro cluster too?
Sorry, what?
Do you support the Metro cluster, a stretch cluster?
We do. You do? Yeah. So basically, if you have high bandwidth and low latency connectivity, you can run it in that mode as well.
And do you need a quorum, a witness, or how do you?
So there is a quorum in there, and then we can figure out if you want to run quorum only on one side or not, depending on if the cluster is imbalanced. If like there is a large cluster and then there are few machines here, we can try to configure the quorum on one side. But there is a quorum built in where we are storing all of our cluster information. There is a highly resilient key value store which is part of our control plane. Okay. So you would put some region name here. So I'm just going to say US Central and AZ, let's call it Austin. And you would create the cloud admin. ft.austin.com. So now this is pretty much all you need on day one once you have racked and stacked the machines. So now you have basically entered your network configuration, you have picked your storage, and you have created a cloud admin account, and then you just say build my cloud, and this step takes about 15 to 20 minutes, and 15 to 20 minutes later your cloud would be up and running. So, and notice here that we did not install any software, we did not configure any management services, we did not install any databases, we did not configure between database and storage. We really just had to give some basic information, and the rest is handled by the control plane, which is built into the ZeroStack operating system. And that is really the seamless cloud experience that customers get, where they don't need any expert who knows how to set up a cloud, what does it mean, what are the different services, what is SDN, what is SDS. All of that stuff is taken care of by the software.
Ajay, you had the availability zone region in the UI there. So returning to the idea of a stretch cluster, you would have a 3 AZ configuration that would then build that quorum across and give us that witness at the third location. Am I stretching from what you've shown, or is that the way the product works?
Sorry, I didn't get the thing. You're saying, let's say there is a stretch cluster.
Yeah, so we're talking about wanting to be able to survive the loss of a data center or a cluster. You had availability zones listed as an element that you're creating in there. Could we do a 3 availability zone configuration that gives us that 3-way cluster?
So you can do multiple availability zones. The difference here is that if you're running your applications on one, we are not actively replicating that application state onto the other side. That currently we can do with our storage partners. So if you leverage, let's say, either a external storage, NetApp, Nimble, Pure, at that point you can put the data on those storage, and they can do the remote replication, and that would give you essentially the DR functionality.
Okay, so the stretch we're talking about would be within an AZ, not
exactly.
across AZs.
Yeah. Okay, so since this will take about 15-20 minutes, let me continue with the rest of the presentation, and then we can come back to this. So this was basically the cloud creation, which is the day one activity. Okay. The next thing is you want to be able to integrate with other systems, because cloud is not a silo. It's not that you just run one thing. The whole point is to be able to pool your resources together, leverage your existing investments, and being able to move the application if there is a need. So for that, what we have done essentially, we have 2 main kind of integrations: the storage integration as well as the other multi-cloud integration. And what we have essentially done is you can go to the SaaS portal or the ZBrain, and you can add external providers like AWS and VMware. You can also add external storage that you can leverage as part of the cloud. And you can obviously configure AD, LDAP, and other connectivity as part of the SaaS portal. The thing to remember here is you are pretty much doing everything at the SaaS portal. You are never worrying about installing or bringing anything up locally. But once you do that, a lot of activity happens on the ZeroStack cluster on premise. For example, when you connect to the existing storage, the connectivity is between local existing storage and the local cluster. So you're connecting over LAN. Similarly, when you connect to a VMware environment, you are connecting over LAN. So when you migrate from VMware, you are actually migrating over your LAN network, which is much faster than trying to move between on-prem and AWS in most cases. And obviously the AD LDAP connectivity is also local. And when we do AWS migration, there also all the data movement is between local and AWS. The SaaS is essentially a control plane where you can go and configure things. It is never routing any data through it.
Can you configure multiple AD LDAP configurations, like multiple domains?
Multiple domains. I think you should be able to. I would have somebody answer the question from the company. I can get back to you on that. Okay. I think I should be able to, but I would let somebody confirm.
Can you, so I guess this would be more of like a multi-tenant kind of configuration. So maybe not different customers, but maybe would you be able to set up which accounts would have access to specific availability zones?
which accounts, yes, that you can do. Yeah. Okay, so let's go through the demo of that, but before, if I look at all the concepts that ZeroStack provides in terms of virtual machines, block storage, object storage, it's very similar to AWS. And I think that also helps us migrate things from AWS to ZeroStack. So in AWS, you have a concept of a VPC that maps to a concept of a project in our domain. And there you have private networks, we have private networks. There you have elastic IPs, we have floating IPs. So there is one-to-one mapping between a lot of things you would do on AWS versus you do on ZeroStack. And that basically helps, one, in giving the same experience to the customers, as well as moving the workloads or the configuration back and forth if needed. So they have EBS volumes, we have volumes in ZeroStack, and it's very similar concept. So let's go through external storage, and for this let me just go through some demos. I'll start with the VMware to ZeroStack migration, because some of these operations, they take a little bit of time depending on how large is the hard disk. So in the interest of time, I have recorded most of these things over last day or two. So here what we are essentially doing is we are adding a new external cloud provider. And here we are adding VMware as an external cloud provider. So all you have to do is you have to just enter your vCenter credentials, and it would authenticate with vCenter, and it will show you basically VMware as a cloud provider. And then you can look at ZeroStack workloads, but you can also look at VMware workloads. So now what it is showing you is the VMware cluster inventory. So we added VMware, now you have ZeroStack workloads, you also have, we call them external workloads because you can then migrate them if you want to. And here we are going to basically migrate a VM from VMware to ZeroStack. So let's go to VMware first to make sure there is a VM running there, and we want to create some file there so that we know that's exactly the same VM that got migrated so that we can test the file. So we are just creating a file on the Windows VM which is running on vSphere right now. So it says I am a Windows VM on ESX, please migrate me to ZeroStack.
And question, do you have any special requirements for VMware environment? I don't know, hypervisor, virtual hardware, standard switch versus distribution switch?
We are essentially leveraging VMware vSphere APIs, and we have tested with VMware 5.5, vSphere 6, so we don't have any specific requirements. When you are migrating, actually you would see that, so now we are basically doing the migration, and it essentially picked a, so there is a source and then it picked a destination flavor which says, okay, this is the VM you are migrating, it has that many CPU, that much memory, and it picked the closest flavor that we have on our environment. And you also can do the networking configuration here. So let's say on VMware side, you have a network, it could either be based on NSX or it could be based on DVS. You can pretty much have a network as part of your project on ZeroStack, and you can say bring these VMs, they were on the same network on VMware, bring them on this network. So these are the things that you are selecting right now. So for example, you picked a private network, you can also pick external network if you want external connectivity into the VM. And you are picking the volumes as well.
Can you do a batch job and do a bunch of VMs at once?
I think we should be able to. It's essentially you are selecting the VMs and then you are migrating.
Okay.
Could it be made live?
Live migration?
Yeah.
No, it's cold migration. Yeah.
It's not vMotion.
Yeah, it's not vMotion.
Okay.
I think that would be a,
Asking too much.
yeah, that's a lot of technology in itself to be able to do a live migration between ESX and KVM.
You mentioned that you had tested for 5.5 and 6. Is there any ongoing testing for 6.5?
I think 6.5 is probably in the works as well. I need to check if it's already released or if it's coming out soon. Most of these things are just a matter of setting up that environment, going through our regular test cycle, and I can check as part of our latest release notes where we are.
Okay, thank you.
So carrying on from Josh's question about multiple VMs, what's the scripting and automation interfaces that are available for administrators?
Okay, so in terms of your own scripting, you can use Cloud Init. That is basically when a VM comes up, you can put some script in there. It would essentially take care of configuration. If you want to do automation against the whole environment itself, we support OpenStack APIs, so you can do that. If you want to do a lot more sophisticated, bring up within the VM or assign a certain personality, you can use Chef, Puppet, any of the other
I want to
imaging
migrate 300 VMs off my existing vSphere environment.
I see. I think we can do a bulk migration, and now you would select them and we'll migrate. I would say right now we do ask a few questions saying, okay, this VM is coming, this is the network you are picking and storage you are picking. So you would have to answer some of those. We can try to pick defaults in most cases. It's just that right now most customers, they want to be able to pick those, and we are giving that flexibility. Okay, yeah, so basically we can do role-based access for different groups to different BU and project, and we can do multiple VMs at a time. Yeah, I think we have a internal Slack channel. People are responding there in case I don't know the release dates yet.
I guess that's the thing, though, is that having the ability to just script it or to feed in a text document that's all of these VMs need to move is ideal. Because, I mean, like for me, if I was going to migrate to ZeroStack, then I have tens of thousands of virtual machines, and I'm not going to scroll through and select.
Oh, I see. You are saying you don't want to use UI at all. I mean, at that point, it's really, okay.
Yeah.
But if there was some sort of mapping of if I'm using this resource on my vSphere environment, please use this resource on ZeroStack. A little bit like what Site Recovery Manager does when it says you're moving from here to here, here's the mapping of resources. And then I only have to manually handle the exceptions. That's probably going to be helpful.
True. Actually, yeah, that's a good point. We can provide that upfront mapping. You pick it once at least, and now everything
and then all
would
the
go
sensible
through.
defaults are taken as you choose your hundreds of VMs to migrate. But still, the thousands of VMs is going to be painful.
True. Okay. So essentially, we are doing the migration, and the migration is happening over LAN. So the VMware migration happens much faster. When we do migration from AWS, there it just depends how much connectivity you have with AWS. And these days, for most data centers, you can get fat pipes to AWS. They give you these 10 gig lease links. So I think that can help with that as well. So it's just the migration is taking a little bit of time. I'm not sure how large is the virtual disk in this case.
Workload migration are just unidirectional or also bidirectional. You can move from VMware to ZeroStack and go back to VMware. And what about AWS?
So right now we have done bidirectional with AWS.
Okay.
With VMware, we have only done unidirectional so far. Typically, if you are coming from VMware, you have a existing snapshot on VMware, so you can easily go back, but we can help you go back and do the conversion as well. We have a manual process, not automated right now.
So whenever you migrate out to AWS, does ZeroStack stop doing monitoring and healing on that workload, or is it still considered part of my ZeroStack cloud, even though it's running on AWS?
So once you migrate something to AWS, at that point, we are not monitoring that VM because now you need HA from AWS. We are not monitoring the VM. Okay. In our UI, you can basically put VM HA, and now the control plane is monitoring that VM. Okay. So the VM actually migrated. Now the VM is running on ZeroStack. And we can see the same file here that we just created at that time saying migrate me. Okay, so the next demo I wanted to show was actually AWS to ZeroStack migration. And here again, the process is fairly similar. You basically add AWS as a provider instead of VMware, and now that would be your external cloud provider. So you can see now you have ZeroStack, you have AWS, you have VMware, you have all three platforms as part of the same SaaS portal. Again, in this case, there is a CentOS VM which is running on AWS. We are just logging in to create a file again on the VM before we do the migration. And then once it comes on ZeroStack, we can check the status on that file. And in this case also, it's essentially we are taking a snapshot of the EBS volumes. We are migrating them over. We are migrating the flavor from AWS, picking a flavor on our side. We are picking a network on ZeroStack side, so there is a mapping between AWS to ZeroStack. And essentially, you can migrate multiple VMs also at the same time if that's your application running on AWS.
I see you're using the right editor there, so that's good.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We are going into the Vim versus Emacs debate. And what you see on the top is essentially our self-service portal. So you see the summary of the project, VMs, applications, networking, security, volumes. This is basically our self-service portal where you can go in and you can do all the operations like you can do on any other cloud platform.
So here's a quick question. It kind of goes to the automation, things that's been discussed a little bit. What logic do you guys have in here so that if I actually do automate 1,000 VMs moving from VMware, you don't just cripple the system with workload? Because presumably, the system is going to attempt to then just start rolling through those migrations.
True.
And unless you're doing an initial setup, odds are you're actually running a production system or at least a highly utilized dev system. Does your system do anything to account for that, or is it kind of on me to just not move too many at once?
So right now, given that it's cold migration, it's not. I mean, you have to shut down the VM in order for us to migrate.
Well, I get that part, but I mean more the load on your system. So if I'm running real workloads that are operational, I get that I'm moving cold workloads over here, but that's still going to take a hit. Your
on
servers,
our system itself.
Yeah, you're going to take a hit on your system itself. So does your system have any way to, I don't want to say protect itself, but
so we do have few things already in place. For example, for most of the VMs and workloads that we run, we can set up network limits saying this can only consume so much network. So we can slow down something which is happening. I need to check if there is something very specific to where you can control the number of VMware VMs being migrated or not. Okay. I think that I'm not sure if we have a number for that. But we have storage and networking QoS controls that you can set that would limit your consumption.
Yeah, I'd be curious about not necessarily a number of VMs, but if I'm migrating this to hosts that are already at nearly capacity for performance, whether it be CPU or memory, to let me know, maybe don't migrate it here, or you're going to need to add more resources before you actually finish these migrations. So,
I mean, you're saying the near capacity on the ZeroStack side or on the vSphere side?
On the ZeroStack side. So if I'm going to move over 300 workloads as an example, and I only have 2 hosts, and there's just no more resources available, Are you going to recommend you're going to need something else, or just let me do it and then I'll just suffer the consequences afterwards?
True. Actually, that's a great point. That it can handle today itself. So the way you do it is you essentially create the project and you only assign a certain amount of quota on the project. So if you have some amount of capacity and you don't overcommit the projects, then when you are doing the migration, it would say you are now creating a new VM in the project and you are going to run out of capacity.
Okay.
So that's where it would help. And I can show that real quick. We have a live system here. For example, this is one of our live systems internally. And here, if you go into engineering, so for example, this is one of our internal live systems where we are running all of ZeroStack's build process, CI/CD. All the developers are running the development on a ZeroStack box. And you can see that we have different projects here. If you go to our build project, the total number of CPU hours it has consumed is about 33,000. And here, as part of planning, it shows how much is consumed. So you have 64 CPU capacity and you have 33 allocated. You have 100 GB capacity, you have 66 allocated.
Do you assign a project to cluster resources? So like these hosts are in, or this cluster is, or yeah, so this project is assigned to this cluster.
So essentially you are running so the cluster is essentially the cloud.
Right.
Project and business units are the logical entities on top. So the way it works is you have the cloud, then you create business units. You can assign a quota on the business unit level, and then you can further partition it at a project level. Now, by default, the project can consume any resource from this cloud. But if you want to restrict, then we have placement groups where you can say, this is a placement group, and this project can only use this placement group. Okay. At that point, you are restricting the project to a certain set of hosts. But by default, when you bring up VMs, it would pick the host with the least amount of resource utilization to bring up your VMs. Okay. So I think that was the AWS migration. Let me quickly go over the external storage connectivity. And this is, and here we are essentially configuring the external storage as part of ZeroStack Cloud. So you would see here we are starting with ZeroStack Cloud pools, but we are going to configure an external box, which in this case is Nimble Storage. And essentially it is as simple as just going and saying add external storage. You pick the profile of Nimble. You have to enter few pieces of information, which typically is the IP address and the admin credentials. Now, once you add that, you would see there is ZeroStack pool. There is actually, in this case, there is a NFS pool, and then there is a Nimble storage pool. And when you are creating volumes now, it would give you the capability to create volumes on that external storage. So now if you go to a project, and if you go to the block storage and you say, I want to create a new volume, you can create it on Nimble storage. There is also other functionality in terms of creating snapshots and all of that that you can do from the either Nimble store or our own. Okay, so another answer about the migration, it basically says that the migration also schedules across the cloud instead of specific host. So the load is balanced across machines when you are doing migration from VMware. Okay. We move to a project which has a, yeah, I think that was another thing, that if you are trying to restrict how much you can migrate, you basically are migrating into the project, and the project has a quota, and that lets you configure that.
Okay.
That you don't over migrate and realize you are running out of resources here.